So when Reverend Jackie asked some of us to preach for a few Sundays in July, she said that we could pick any passage or any theme from anywhere in the Bible, which was entirely too intimidating for me. So you guys are getting what's in the Revised Common Lectionary for this week and next week. It's a couple Jacob stories. It'll be great. In this week's reading, darkness is falling, and we find our hero stopping for the night. Jacob is on his way to Haran, which is where his great-grandfather Terah settled, and where most of his family still lives, because the apple did not marry very far from the tree in the early family, of the matriarchs and patriarchs of the Bible, because apparently sexy cousins are biblical. And Jacob is on this journey for two related reasons, pun intended. One is to go to the home of his maternal uncle to find himself a wife, see aforementioned sexy cousins. And two, to put some distance between himself and his older twin brother Esau. Because not so long ago, Jacob and his mother Rebekah conspired to trick his aging father into bestowing Jacob with a blessing that Isaac had intended for Esau. Esau was quite naturally furious about the stolen blessing, and so he said to himself that he would wait until his father died, and then he was going to kill his upstart brother. Their mother Rebekah finds out about it, and she tells Jacob to flee to the home of her brother Laban in Haran. And then, in what in my opinion is a rather masterful move, she makes her husband think it's his idea, and then he also sends Jacob to Haran, but with the intention of him finding himself a wife. So we tend to think of Jacob as a trickster character, kind of manipulating situations so that they come out in his favor, but I think that trait definitely comes from his mother's side, and I want you to keep that in mind for next week, because next week we're going to meet up with Uncle Laban. Teaser, come back. This week, we pick up this morning where Jacob's on the road. The sun has set, yet he hasn't set up camp for the night. And that could be because he's just woefully unprepared and forgot to pack a tent. But I think it's more likely that he has gone as far as he possibly can that day, until he's run out of light, or he's just become too exhausted to continue. And he lies down to sleep with a rock for a pillow. Far from home, running away from the family of his birth and toward the family of his future, in this liminal place, Jacob lies down and has a dream. In it, a stairway or a ladder stretches up from the earth to heaven, and he sees angels coming and going, angels also in a liminal place, coming and going between heaven and earth. Even God. The story is full of people in in-between places. Because bam, suddenly in verse 13, we read, "The Lord stood beside him." There's no voice from heaven. There's no golden thrones. There's no earth like turquoise glass beneath God's feet. It doesn't really sound like God descended from on high at all. God is just suddenly there. And God's appearance in this story is so sudden that some scholars speculate that it's because there are actually two stories here that have been knit together. One story that focuses on Jacob's ladder, and one story that focuses on God's promise to Jacob. But I wonder, because Monica has taught me to wonder, I wonder if God's appearance is so sudden because God was already standing beside Jacob when he fell asleep, and he just didn't know about it. And that sounds familiar to me, and maybe it does for you too, because I am the sort of person who can push through a crisis, let's say a sudden health emergency, or maybe a couple years of global pandemic, trying to hold myself and everyone else together by sheer force of will. And when the acute danger has passed, I find that my soul is tired. And collectively, I think over the past 3 years or so, we have all managed and we have endured, and now we're weary. We've heard that God is with us in the midst of the dangers and sorrows of the world, but it doesn't always feel that way. Sometimes it just feels like it's dark and we're tired and there's nothing around but stones. Everything is hard. Everywhere we want to be is far away from where we are right now, and we're alone. We don't feel blessed. We don't feel strong. We find ourselves in desolate places, and we lie down and we wait for the morning, if one is coming, because we don't know what else to do. And God stood beside Jacob. God stood with him in the dark. God stood with him as in his dream his eyes were opened, and he saw the light falling from the rim of heaven onto the dark earth. And he knew that heaven was not so far away, but was close enough to be linked by the rungs of a ladder. Isaac's promise to Jacob in our text echoes the promise that God made to his father Isaac and to his grandfather Abraham. This is the first time that Jacob has encountered God personally, but the promises God made here would have been familiar because he would have heard the stories of such encounters from his parents and his grandparents. I wonder if he believed them until now. And the Lord stood beside him and said, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. And you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." From this in-between place, God is saying to Jacob, "I will spread out your people and the blessings that they are meant to be to all of the corners of the earth. Your home is wider than you know. Your family will be wider than you can know. I am with you," present tense, "I am with you and will keep you wherever you go." That the people will become a conduit of God's blessing to the world, that is the promise that God made to Abraham in Genesis 12. So those of you who worship at Knox regularly will know that Reverend Jackie considers Genesis 12 to be one of those linchpin scriptures that helps you understand the whole arc of the Bible. So God's relationship with the people of Israel and God's relationship and desire for the world today, that the people of God are blessed in order to be a blessing to the world. And Jacob is blessed in order to be a blessing. The man who just stole his older brother's blessing from their father. And a man who, alone in the dark, I think, was not feeling particularly blessed until he began to dream. Jacob names the place Bethel, meaning house of God, which is so interesting to me because there's nothing resembling a house here. All he's got is a rock and a dream and a promise, and maybe that's all it takes to build a house for God. A dream and a promise and something to act like a cornerstone. Jacob takes his former pillow and anoints it with oil, which is a way of signifying blessing or holiness or dedicating something for a particular purpose. And in doing so, Jacob is turning memory into landscape. This place is special. He wants to be able to find it again. He wants to be able to tell other people about it. He knows already he's going to hand the story on to generations of people who are yet unborn. There's a weight to that. And lest you think that this is sort of a funny, Bible-era thing, we still do this today. We want to go back to places that have been significant to us, whether those are literal places or figurative ones. We carve the names of loved ones on stones to mark their final resting places. We hang diplomas in our walls to show that the landscape of our minds has been cultivated and has borne fruit in some particular knowledge. We take photos so that we can capture moments in time and we can mentally return to them again. We still memorialize. We remember. We set up signposts along our own journey through life so that we can remind ourselves of the good times or the times we overcame great adversity, and we can return to them in memory when things are hard. And if we're people of faith, we share the stories of our ancestors in faith, the stories of the promises of God, believing that there is truth in them for us too. These signposts have been left for us to help act as markers in the dark places when we may not feel the presence of God for ourselves. The characters in the Bible are not perfect people. They're flawed, and they often make stupid decisions. The place that Jacob names Bethel, names the house of God, becomes a site of idolatry generations later. You can read about it in 1 Kings 12. It goes great, but that's another sermon for another time. Today, Jacob wakes up, literally and figuratively. It's very early, but the horizon is pale with the promise of dawn. He's full of wonder and fear, and Jacob makes a choice to remember, to honor the holiness he encountered that night. And he does so with a makeshift monument, a way to find the physical place again, and with a vow, a way to walk in relationship with the divinity that had revealed itself to him. A house of God will, for good or ill, one day be built in the place that he calls Bethel. But for now, that house is built only of memory and promises and a dream. And he pours out his hopes upon it like oil over stone. There's wisdom here for us. If you have walked in the dark until you can't walk anymore, know that God is just a few steps behind you, just beyond the edge of your vision. Know that hard things can one day become your monuments. Know that rest, whether it's intentional or forced upon you by circumstance, can bring unexpected blessings and insights. Know that heaven is close enough to be glimpsed. Know that houses, entire houses, can be built out of such fragile things as memory and promises and dreams. Maybe you built such a house for God in your own life. If not, may I invite you to find yourself a cornerstone. Know that I am with you, God says, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave until I have done what I have promised you. To God be all the glory. Amen.